On Michelson Alexander Explains, we've been looking at the Olympics and how the stories of the Games have cut through with the public, much of which were in lockdown. This week, the Paralympics starts, and once again, it hits at a time when we are all in desperate need of good news stories. Don Elgin competed at 3 Paralympics in athletics and won 4 medals. He is an amputee, having been born without the lower half of his left leg. He is now the head of Wallara Online and remains connected to our Paralympic team via StarAmp Global, a management company he founded to support amputee athletes. In this episode of Michelson Alexander Explains, Don joins us to talk about what the Paralympic movement has meant to his life, the messaging around disability, and how the moment in the media spotlight the Paralympics will have over the next few weeks can communicate messages far beyond sport.
And they get away cleanly. Elgin just a little bit slow out, but Coley is really running it quick the first 45 metres. Back on the inside, Burleson of the United States. But he's up there, Elgin. Elgin could actually get this one. He has. Don Elgin has got there ahead of Urs Coley. And then in third place, Jeremy Burleson of the United States. What a fillip for Don Elgin at the halfway point of the men's P44 pentathlon. His winning time, 12:49.
Don, thanks for joining us on Michelson Alexander Explains. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into your story in a minute. But as this episode drops, Paralympics are about to start, or you might be listening and they have started. What, more broadly, what does this time mean to you as a former Paralympian and more broadly the community that it represents?
Yeah, it's a cracking question, Shannon. I think there's quite a few emotions that come into play. When I competed at the Sydney Games, one of the really interesting thing was we had a massive storm right before my pentathlon, the third event of my pentathlon, which was 100 metres. I actually won that race, which was pretty bloody rare, to be honest, for me to win a race. And when I won that, and the footage, I love the footage because it's a come from behind victory, but there's no crowds, and the Paralympic movement would go, wow, is there no crowds? Why wasn't there any crowds? Is it because people weren't turning out? Is it because, no one says, oh, was there a massive storm and everyone just went for shelter? But the reality is we've just watched the Olympic Games with no crowds. And for me, that it sort of gives the cycle of that no crowds experience a full 360. We've gone from, right, this is the only way to take in a Games. This is important if people turn up to watch it, yet we know they've had record crowds from people watching at home. So the other really good thing about the Games this time is the medals are getting bloody hard to win. And I'm not saying they weren't hard to win when I picked up my ones, but the joy and what the guys do today has an impact on the way I feel about the Games. To be honest, I tuned out of a couple of games. I was sort of a bit over it, and I thought the athletes were getting a bit like, particularly Olympians. I felt that there was a fair bit of preciousness or almost an expectation that we should be fortunate because we get to watch the Olympics. The athletes were, sponsorship, that type of stuff. Whereas now I think they had a chance in this pandemic to reflect and go, we're bloody grateful for the opportunity to have a Games to compete at, and everybody can take more away from it. So, honestly, I think if we thought we were enthused with the Olympics, we're about to be blown away by the Paralympics.
And Don, we're obviously a little bit familiar with your story because you're a long-standing Michelson Alexander client through your work with Wallara. But I thought I'd just get you to talk a little bit about your understanding of your own disability growing up. Because for a long time, you didn't even consider yourself to be a person that would be eligible to compete at a Paralympic Games.
Yeah, well, the funny thing was, mate, is my parents raised me. And I remember thinking back, and I'm about to go all ages, and I'm 45. So, 1975, people with a disability didn't have the luxuries that I would say that we have today. We didn't have organisations asking and demanding for people with a disability to have to have a right, to have says. As a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. If you had a disability, you were a burden on society. And I knew that because that's what society told me. And it was my parents' attitude to say, well, stuff it. Let's just pretend you don't have a disability. Let's rip you through life. And believe it or not, you can do everything your brother or your sister and your sisters can do. So I grew up with the notion that I didn't have a disability. I fit in. I was normal because in those days, normal was the benchmark. Like if you were outside of the realms of 2 arms and 2 legs, and then you probably weren't quite normal. So my parents said, no, stuff it. You're normal. Away you go. And just get on with it. And don't look back and worry about what's not there because it's not going to change anything. Go with what you can. So my approach to life was always that I grew up, the words of disabled, handicapped, special, those words were never used in my family. It was just like, mate, little Donnie, you want a glass of water? Get off your bum and get it. And so that approach, one is it created resilience and independence for me, which I'm ridiculously grateful for. But it enabled me to see that society really can control, and perceptions can control the way we go through life, how we limit ourselves. So I was fortunate that a couple of my mates, educated me, schooled me at school. Actually, they said, Donnie, the Paralympic Games, mate, they're coming. Why don't you go? I was 14. I said, what are they? And they said, oh, they're games for disabled people. I said, okay, go to those. I said, why not? I said, duh, I'm not disabled. They said, mate, you've got one leg. You're disabled. So they started to talk. And the more they talked, the more I got interested in the fact that I could potentially play sport for my country. And they dropped this little perler and they said that if the Olympics are overseas, so are the Paralympics. Now, I'd always thought, how good would it be to go overseas? I mean, the only people that represented Australia overseas were the cricketers. And I figured I was never going to be a bloody cricketer. I went out for a duck on my first game. And so that was the end of my cricketing career. But seriously, the notion of playing sport for my country just got me. And so it hooked me in a heartbeat. And then when I got my butt kicked at my first state championships, that's when it actually went a long way to changing my parents' views of what they thought disabled was, because they also had a little understanding that if their boy, who they thought was pretty able-bodied and could do everything that anyone else could do, could get his butt kicked by other people with one leg, then that meant that this games was the real deal. So, and I love that. It really changed everything very quickly for me. And then I started to slowly own the fact that I could be disabled and I could be proud of it. And it didn't necessarily mean that it was going to hold me back or put me in a box for the rest of my life.
What was the feeling like when you first got the call up and got the selection to represent your country?
But I've had the weirdest journey in terms of selection. My parents ran the public swimming pool in Tokawal, and I swim without my leg on, and contrary to a lot of belief, I can go straight up and down, not around in a circle like a one-legged duck. But the truth is, I always thought that swimming was good. If I was going to make it in the world of sport, it was going to be as a swimmer. And honestly, I can swim better than I can walk. And I finally, in 1990, got a letter saying, Don, you've been selected to go to the World Champs. And I was bloody pumped. I thought, how good is this? And then, unfortunately, the Gulf War, you might be too young to remember it, but the Gulf War was on. No teams were allowed to leave the country. So it meant that my first ever selection didn't get honoured because I couldn't go. So, geez, that's a bit bloody rough. When politics come into what you think is a lifelong dream to represent the country, little did I know it was really just the start of a journey of many more opportunities. And then the one that really got me, I think the reason it really was amazing is because after I'd made the world champions and didn't get to go because of the war, I then I attempted to make it to the Barcelona Paralympic Games. And the Barcelona Paralympic Games, they took 12 amputees to represent Australia. And unfortunately for me, I was ranked number 13. So I missed out by one spot. And I was gutted. And I just thought, you can get stuffed, that's it, stuff it, I've retired. And my dad said to me, he goes, mate, that attitude, that'll get you nowhere in life. He goes, you've got to have another crack. You can't bloody retire. He goes, you're 16, have another go. So, and then my love of sport really kicked in. I went to state and national championships doing both swimming and athletics. And I did get that call. I did make it in my first year, 1994, to go to 2 outings for Australia. One was the World Championships, my first ever competition. And then about 3 weeks after that, I went to the FESPIC Games, which is the Far East and South Pacific International Conference for athletes with a disability. And so I went to both of those games. And seriously, to go to and to represent your country, there is such a massive array of emotions. There's the emotion of, well, I've done this. This is going to be awesome. And I've never flown before. And so I got to the airport. And then I looked around and I've seen all these fat people, like massive people getting on my plane. I just thought, how's this even going to stay up in the air? Like, this is my naive young mind from Tokyo, just packing myself. We land, I'm on the other side of the world. I ring home to say, I made it. It's in the middle of the night here. And, so all that, like, trust me, it was a whirlwind of things going on. And then, of course, to come home with a gold and a bronze medal, it was electric. And I was bitten by the bug to want to keep competing and experience that euphoria of standing on the podium. And of course, that got me through for about the best part of 20 years, to travel our world and play sport.
And so you said there that you initially, am I right in saying you initially tried your hand at swimming? How close did you get to kind of, obviously most of your success was in athletic events, but how close was your success in swimming? And then I guess the follow-up to that is, why did you kind of make that decision to change your focus?
Yeah, well, it was an easy one to start with swimming, because like, that's when you have a public swimming pool in your front yard, like, you're in the pool all the time. So being a good swimmer, I was representing our school at up to sort of zone level. So, I was holding my own in that space. And then to make it into World Championship selection, which was really cool, but not to go because of the Gulf War. That was a bit of a like, oh, there's an anticlimax if ever there's been one. And then, of course, to go and to be competitive, what it takes an enormous amount of work. So, and you commit to being in and doing whatever it takes if you want to reach that pinnacle. And to be honest, in the middle of winter in Tokyo, our swimming pool is cold and it's green, it's bloody slimy. And that's not appealing for someone who in the middle of winter in Tokyo could be playing football with my mates. So for me, the draw of athletics, which I could train for while I was playing footy, just made a lot of sense. And I think the real driver for me was the fact that I had fun. And I figure that's the same, the more I reflect in life, if you're having fun doing what you're doing, you're around good people and you're enjoying it. And that's exactly what was happening in athletics, in between the shot puts or the high jump. The other amputees, they'd be telling jokes, they'd be having fun, like, it was actually a really great environment. So it taught me a lot that if you're going to do the extra work, then you need to line up a few ducks. Things have to be in your favor. And if you're up against it from the outset, then you're probably just going to quit at the time you need to be knuckling in down and doing the hard work.
You talked about as a sort of 14 and 15-year-old, not even knowing that the Paralympics existed, or maybe at a slightly younger age. Things have changed. I think the Paralympics is something that everyone knows about now, which is a great thing. Do the all abilities or disability communities, do they see the Paralympics as an opportunity to progress the broader movement or the broader needs of their community at large? And is there a message that I suppose that community wants to put out at that time, wants to showcase at that time to the wider world?
Yeah, I don't think there's an organisation around that has anything to do with disabilities that wouldn't in some way, shape or form look to the Paralympic Games and be really excited the fact that this is the pinnacle. And they would absolutely want to showcase. I mean, the Paralympic Games is the platform for the best of the best. There's one catch, and that is you have to have a disability. And so as long as you've got the disability box tick and you can, be the best of the best, then you have absolutely every right to be there if there's an event on. And organisations will look at that and go, well, this is possible. What the Paralympic Games do is they give people hope. If you see a little kid running around, they've got a disability. Nowadays, they'll talk about, oh, wouldn't you like to go to the Paralympics? Would that be a thing? And the answer can be yes, and a comfortable yes. Whereas as years gone by, like, I grew up thinking I was going to play footy. I literally grew up dreaming about playing VFL back then. So because I didn't know about the Paralympics. So there's definitely a lot of credibility that comes with the Paralympic Games. There's a lot of synergies with that's the light at the end of the tunnel if you wish to pursue that. So it's not to say everybody with a disability is going to go to the Paralympic Games, but what it also does, just like we've seen with the Olympic Games, it inspires people to get off their butt and do more with what they've got. And if you've got a disability, then there's a vehicle for you to take it and to go somewhere with it.
And we've spoken before, I think you pulled me up in an email once because I may have mislabeled the Paralympic Games as the Olympic Games. And you sort of spoke a little bit in your response about the pride that Paralympians take in being their own distinct kind of movement. And I guess I wanted you to kind of ask you about that, like where that kind of pride that flows from being a different movement, like where does that originate from? And then also how strong is that kind of sense of pride?
It's a really good one, and I'm glad we were able to move through that. And because what for me that was another chance for me to help educate, and that's what the Paralympic movement's doing. It's educating all the time around what's possible, and at some point there needs to be ownership over it. And for a long time, the Paralympians were the poor brother of the Olympics, and a lot of people wanted people to deserve or receive the same accolades as the Olympians got, because we know that the Olympians have, even just simply have a look at the coverage. Yes, Channel 7 have picked up the coverage, but there's a lot of hours that won't be covered that were covered at the Olympics. And so it's still moving in the right direction. And am I saying that it's a bad thing? No, I think it's bloody great. It's better than it was. Can it be better? Sure, it can. Will it ever be on a level playing field and on par with the Olympics? Well, that's a personal choice. You'd say the same thing is there ever going to be disability that is invisible in the eyes of society? And the reality is probably not. There's always going to be little stepping stones and things to improve on, which is good because, why should we have it all perfect? I don't believe it needs to be perfect for it to work. And the reason the Proud Paralympian tag come about is one, to understand that in our own right, we've worked hard to be a Paralympian. And there are a handful, and literally only a handful, of elite athletes with a disability that are Paralympians and Olympians. And that's not many. There's very, very few. And to their credit, I say bloody good luck to them, because the Olympics is the ultimate. And the Paralympics is the ultimate for anybody with a disability. So I think that over time, we'll see more and more Paralympians being prouder and prouder of the fact that we've been able to sustain the journey of the Paralympic movement, because it was a long time. Like the Olympic movement, a bit of background about that is the Olympic movement said, no, we don't want it to be called the Paralympians. They wanted nothing to do with the Olympics in the name when it was the Paralympics. And so it was like, it actually had a lot of Paralympians a bit put offside back then. It's like, well, get stuff then, we'll make this work. So, and the guts of where the Paralympic movement has come from is it was all around, it started out as a rehab exercise for people with a disability to get over their injuries and to be able to move better than they otherwise were by sitting in rehab hospitals and not doing much. So the thought of competition, because typically it was young men that were mostly disabled or acquiring disabilities through their stupidity or living life in a bit of a faster lane than they needed to. And so then, and of course, a lot of young men are competitive. So that nature of competition and pushing each other to get better, really, that's how that was the birth of the Paralympic Games. So now that it stands, and the Paralympic stands for parallel to the Olympics. And I don't think there'll be a Paralympian out there that wouldn't think twice about being called an Olympian and hope that they're not. So because they do want to be seen as a proud Paralympian.
You mentioned just then about the television coverage of the Paralympics and how it will be on Channel 7, not to the same saturation coverage as the Olympics, but still there nonetheless, which is a huge thing because, well, looking at your own background, you didn't see that as a child. You didn't see that on television. For a young kid today who does see that on television, whether they be someone with a disability or not, that is a great exposure point if they haven't had that exposure point already. Do you think there are ways that Paralympians, or the way that that coverage is presented, which can help in a way that goes well beyond sport?
Oh, without question. I mean, what we're seeing with the coverage of the Paralympic Games, and to honestly, to Channel 7's credit, to Paralympics Australia credit, to secure the ABC rights for as many years as they did, and then to be able to move it into a commercial setting, I think it's awesome. And it needs to have that same alliance. So now if a city bids for an Olympic Games, then they have to bid for the Paralympics. Like that's the written into the legislation of being able to bid for the Games. So it also then puts an onus on the Paralympic Committee then to be able to secure those sort of sponsorships and the coverage and the media rights and all that sort of stuff. And there's money involved in that type of stuff. But more importantly, there's so much education opportunities. You know, for me, it wouldn't have really mattered a great deal for me as a kid watching the Paralympics, because my views were coming from my parents. But the moment my parents got to see that, then I know that they would have influenced me in a different light. So whereas today, kids are going to see the Games, parents are going to see it, organisations, businesses are going to see this, you know, and they will hear the stories of what people have had to overcome. And you saw it in the Olympic Games. Every interview, they were fishing for, tell me the hard luck, tell me what you've overcome, tell me about your parents, your family situation. You know what? You're not going to get away from that at the Paralympics, because one of the major criteria to be there is you've had to overcome some type of adversity, whether it's being born without a leg or a body part, or you're stuck in a chair, or whatever it bloody is. There is another part to the story. And of course, there's the elite athlete side of it. So both of those parts of it are what change the perception of people's views. So the athletes, they will be sick of talking about being inspirational people. They've already overcome the fact that they've had a bloody disability. They've been living with it all their life, most of them. So what they want to do is they want to see the scorecard, the outcomes. They want to compete. They want to be the best athlete they can be. And so they'll be pushing that story, and that will come through. The really exciting thing about it is whatever way you look at it, if you're inspired because somebody can run and they've got no legs, or you're inspired because somebody with no vision at all is willing to play this lunatic game called goal ball, where three people on the team, completely blindfolded, no sight at all, have a ball with a bell in it, and they dive to stop the ball. It's like on a basketball style setup, big like a soccer goal, and they've got to defend that goal and score when it's their turn. You know, if you watch that and go, that's bloody inspirational, you know, then awesome. That really is the guts of what the Paralympics can do, is they can inspire people, because you get to see things and you for a little moment in time put yourself in that situation, go, what would I do if I didn't have any legs or didn't have any sight? Or you look around your house and go, shit, this is not wheelchair accessible. You know, you couldn't get a wheelchair in here. So all of these things, and then people take that into work and say, hey, what are we doing around making life more accessible for people with a disability? And that is one of the real wins that we'll get from the Paralympic Games, is the growth of mindset for people that are viewing the Games.
And we have a lot of conversations with you about language, which I think plays into some of this stuff that, you know, businesses can learn from. And I know Wallara and their CEO, Phil Hayes-Brown, talks about the idea of talking about people with different abilities as opposed to disabilities. And I guess I wondered, in the context of this Paralympics, are there, you know, more appropriate ways of talking about people with disability that perhaps emphasize what they can do rather than what they can't do?
Interesting point there, mate. And it depends on, my view of this is, depends where you are with your disability journey. So if you're somebody who works in the sector, then already your headspace is around, righto, what more can we do? For somebody who's first being exposed to the Paralympic Games, they're not familiar with all this conversation, all this backlog of information around the correct terminology. What they've done is they've had a little something strike a nerve for them, and they go, right, I want to be involved. If they decide then to have a conversation, get involved, and they use the wrong term and get turned away by it, then that is an absolute travesty right there. So what I think is important is the key is to think about the intent. If somebody's coming with pure intent and they're wanting to make a difference, then don't get hung up on words. Yes, the terminologies will be athlete first, disability second. So in other words, here's Don, he's a Paralympic athlete, and, they'll not, here's a disabled person that's doing sport, so we can get hooked on these type of things. And for me, I don't think that it's really useful. What's useful is embracing all the conversation, and over time we'll move the language. We've seen it with other words around racism, around sex, around age. Disability is another one of those things. And yes, there's some laws in place, but I think if you come with pure intent, then you get the best outcomes. If you make a mistake, you apologize, you get educated, and you move on.
On that topic, Don, do you think whether it be media, whether it be business, whoever, do you think sometimes they've been maybe put off because they just don't know how to approach? They don't know the words. They're scared of getting things wrong. And you're saying that if you put your intention front and center, you'll be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's definitely been media examples of people going, that's a tricky situation, and disability is tricky because there's so many advocates in there. They're in the big tent of disability. There's a lot of people that have different views in that, so even here's me laid back and relaxed, being born without my leg, got over the fact that I didn't have a leg, understand that she'll be right. If this is the worst thing that happens to me, I'm going to live a good life. Not everybody shares that attitude. There's some people that haven't come to terms with the fact that they've lost their leg, and they're going to be angry and bitter and disappointed. And the world as they know it has stopped. And so depending on who you meet is to what sort of experience you're going to have. And so the same thing happens when people chime into this space, what type of experience they're going to have. If they have a poor one, and if they've attempted to do a Paralympic special, for example, like the big morning tea or something to celebrate the games, and they're put off by it because they've offended somebody, or they've said something that potentially was a little bit not politically correct, then the reality is that will have an impact on whether they want to roll up their sleeves and do it again next time. My thinking around the whole notion of language and getting involved, again, is just have a crack. If you come from the right place, it'll be okay. Things always turn out okay. And also too, just because I might be offended, well, so bloody what if I'm offended? As long as we haven't broken any laws, as long as we should be able to have a conversation and move through those tricky bits. And if somebody's not sure about disability, and somebody with a disability isn't willing to share and help educate, then they've only got themselves to blame, haven't they? For the person with a disability, if they're not willing to open up and help, then they can hardly turn around and blame somebody else who's trying to do a good thing. And I see that with the Paralympic Games. I see that, in my view, I think the Paralympic Games is somewhat of a startup. Yes, we've been going since 1960 and we've had all these games, and it's grown. But in the scheme of things, when you have a look at the Olympic Games and you have a look at what we're up against, in terms of the same level playing field, then we're a baby in this space. So in my opinion, we're doing really, really well as an organisation, we as in the Paralympic movement, to get the coverage, to get the space and to get to the position we are. What we need to do is to embrace that. So when an organisation says that they want to do an event and put something on, it should be embraced, not necessarily have the Paralympic Committee and the Paralympic sponsors looking at it going, no, you can't use those words because, you're not a sponsor, or you're not, as long as you're not trying to railroad the sponsors and do some ambush marketing and take advantage of something that shouldn't be there. But as long as you're trying to promote it, I think we should have as much support as possible.
The Paralympics tend to generate, role models and icons for society. And I guess my question really is, we've got a lot of athletes now with disabilities who are very prominent because of this movement, and even things like wheelchair tennis and Dylan Alcott is probably the most common example. But what can kind of businesses and organisations do to, outside of the world of sport, centre people with disability and create icons in other spaces?
Yeah, I think the thing I love about disability is it's prominent, and so it gets people's attention. And if you can make something better for somebody with a disability, make no mistakes, you're going to be making it better for society. So when I think about disability, I don't think about me thinking, oh, do I need, some type of special consideration made to support my disability, because the way I see it is I've got a leg I put on the side of the day, I'm as good as anybody else. But would that sort of concession or that support that would help me, would it help my mum and dad who are starting to age? Bloody oath it would. So that's why I say if we can help somebody with a disability, because that's the thing that's front and center of our thinking, then we're going to help society at large. And in my opinion, a more accessible society is a good one. If we want a balanced view, then what we've got to do is we've got to fill the room full of what that balance would look like. So boards, for example, we might be on a board and we have a look around the board and go, actually, there's a lot of middle-aged white blokes here. And you go, okay, well, what can we do about that? For a start, we can have a look at our skills matrix and see if we can put in some females, put in some disability, and not tokenistically. I mean, that's the danger with this, is when we start ticking boxes and doing things tokenistically, then we're not open to real change. But when we say, well, how can we grow, and we incorporate all the views at the table, then we get a real mixed balance. And the person sitting at the table, they can't be just sitting there without a voice. They actually have to contribute. So again, there's a bit of responsibility on both sides for the organisation, the business that wants to promote what they're doing, and importantly, to be open and to listen to what comes their way, but also to push back too if it's not in line with their mission or their charter, to say, no, actually, that's not who we are. But if we're going to grow, then, yep, I reckon fill the room full of people, and the more variety, the better outcomes.
On that topic of filling the room full of people and making sure that there is representation beyond the middle-aged white guy, and in particular in the disability sense, while the Paralympics are on, there'll be spotlight on that community more than perhaps any other time across a 4-year cycle. Have you got anecdotal stories, whether it applies to yourself or whether to others, that how that exposure of people to the Paralympics has actually resulted in great gains in areas that have nothing to do with sport?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, seriously, I'd sort of almost make a joke out of it, the fact that I was the most successful bronze medalist from the Sydney Paralympic Games. So as a motivational speaker, I've spent literally the best part of 20 years traveling the world talking about what I've learned as somebody that traveled with people with a disability. So in terms of sport, my view has always been, how does what we've learned in sport apply to life? And so that's the really awesome thing. So when I look at it now, so I'll go into an organization when I'm not doing my normal day job of leading a team of people, providing online programs for adults with a disability. But when I'm out and about and I'm speaking to an organization, and I think about the fact that they've created a committee to actually make a conscious change within an organization. And that's got nothing to do with having a sports person on that committee. That is saying, hey, we want to embrace what we've seen here, which is inclusion, which is diversity. We want to embrace that in the world. So I've got an organisation coming up literally next week, a massive international brand, and I'll be speaking at their staff conference about getting the conversation started. And they've used, so yes, my sporting background, but also the leverage of the fact that if we're willing to have a conversation, and so what if we stuff it up and we reload and have another one, and then we put a committee together, and then in time, you've got organisations that might not have many people in there with disabilities, but one, they'll have a look at it and say, well, why not? And what can we do? And when you've got people that that aren't disabled, that haven't got any family members that are disabled. They've got no other reason than the fact that they've been inspired or want to make a difference because of who they are as a person, surrounded with other people that want to do that, and an organisation that's willing to do that. That's when you get real change in a place. So, yeah, I definitely think, if it wasn't for the Paralympics, I don't know that I would be having the roles that I have today. So for me, I look at it and think that I've been very fortunate to have been to 3 Paralympic Games, but the opportunity to talk about what I learnt from those games is what makes a difference for me. And when I'm sharing that with other people, and seeing them embrace it is what really excites me.
And we're nearly out of time, so we better finish up. I might get you to leave us with a final reflection on what you're most looking forward to about the next 2 weeks as the Paralympics unfold.
Yeah, you know what, mate? The funny thing about this is, as much as I'm looking forward to watching the lunatics in murder ball and, Riley back, like he is that dead set lunatic. But I love that the gold ball girls, like they'll be good to watch, as I said, just because it'll make you uncomfortable to watch this. And that's where the growth is when we get uncomfortable, we grow. So I'm looking forward to seeing, the people that have been around for a long time. Christy Dawes, the 7th Paralympic Games. Like, get your head around that. Buddy, that is impressive. So these are the things that excite me. But what I'm really looking forward to more than anything is the legacy of these games. So right now, believe it or not, there's a captive market. We've got half the eastern, so almost the entire eastern seaboard locked down, chomping at the bit that they've just gotten over their Olympic opportunities to fill their appetite over the last couple of weeks. They've had a break, had a breather, got out, stretched their legs, locked down again, boom. They're going to be, front and center, get to be inspired. And I hope that inspiration, that what they see is a game changer, because in only a few years' time, Australia will be hosting another Olympics and another Paralympic Games. And wouldn't it be awesome for a kid who's in lockdown now, who's doing it bloody tough because they've got a disability and they can't do what they want to do, to be able to be inspired and to be at those games in 2032. That for me is what I'm looking forward to seeing. I hope I'm around and in good working order to be able to witness it in 2032. And I just cannot wait to see what comes from these games, because these are a tough one. And I think it's going to be awesome for our country to take hold and appreciate what we've got from these games. So, yeah, it's going to be a good couple of weeks. I'm not looking forward to my report card at the end of these 2 weeks for work, because I'm probably going to get stuff all done.
You and most of the rest of Australia, I imagine. That's a very sentimental spot and hopeful spot to end for these times, which I think is a good thing. So thanks so much for joining us this morning, Don. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, I've appreciated it, mate. And I appreciate the fact that, here we have an award-winning podcast, and if it's not bloody winning awards yet, it will be anytime soon. But taking the time to tap into what the Paralympic movement can do, what we can learn from it, so that businesses and other organisations can also benefit. So how good's that? Winning all round.